What's up, gamers? Today, like I said, we're making a mini boss. Well, I guess not technically today. Whatever. For you, it's all happening today, so it's fine. So the goal for this video is by the end of it, I want to have a sick-ass mini boss in the game ready to fight against. I suppose I should say like why we want a mini boss, and it's because they're flippin' sweet, dog. My favorite part of any Mega Man game is fighting bosses, fighting mini bosses, and honestly, I don't even, what's even the distinction between them, huh? Here, in Mega Man, here's a mini boss. Here's another one. This was a big-ass dragon. Meanwhile, here's a regular boss. In theory, not mini. As this guy. Or this guy. Or this guy. They're all tiny. So clearly it has nothing to do with the size of the boss. So in theory, a mini boss is one that is like less complex or easier to fight. You know, it's not as difficult as like a full-on regular boss. But I mean, the one like yellow guy that turns into little blocks and goes across the screen, that guy killed me over and over again. And he is a mini boss, right? Or is he? I don't know. It doesn't matter. The distinction between a boss and a mini boss is inconsequential. I want to make a cool dude that's difficult to fight and rewarding to beat that happens in the middle of the stage instead of at the end of the stage. I already have it planned that at the end of the Corrupted Forest is when you fight the Plague Doctor, based on the Plague Doctor that I had in the Game Jam version. And I also did write some like story and lore behind the forest and like what's going on there to like justify what's going on. With the other areas, I came up with it on my own proactively and then am building the world to fit the story. The forest and the Plague Doctor already existed and I have to like retrofit them, so it's more of like a justification process, but that's all neither here nor there, because that's not the focus of the video. Today, we're making a mini boss. So, what kind of creature fits in the middle of a forest? I was kind of agonizing over this for a little bit, like I'm not sure what's gonna fit best, like what should I do, trying to come up with like the perfect idea, and then I realized that that's a fruitless endeavor, and the best way to do stuff is to just do it. And also, side note, I love frogs. If you've been watching my channel for a long time, you already know that I love frogs. And so I thought, what would fit really well in the Corrupted Forest is a big-ass corrupted frog, with the idea being that he can mark the midway point in the forest where it goes from like the corruption is building to the extremely like corrupted forest, right? Up until this point, as you're entering, you start from the outskirts of the forest. As you get deeper and deeper, things get more and more corrupt until you fight the big corrupted frog. And once you have killed him, once you have defeated the big corrupted frog, you now are in the depths of the forest, the stinky, most stinkiest, stinkeroony corrupted parts. And I also want the gameplay of this big frog to feel like, to be very juxtaposed to the Plague Doctor. I want them to not feel too similar. I want them to have their own unique things. And so with the boss, the things you really need to define are like, how do they move around the stage and what are their attacks? Obviously, I haven't designed and made the official Plague Doctor yet, only have the one from the Game Jam, but that Plague Doctor is very teleporty and shoot projectiles at you and light and airy, right? And also on the more like smaller scale, I think the Plague Doctor is going to end up almost just a little bit bigger than Isadora. Like her cape and weapons and stuff might make her bigger than Isadora, but she's going to be more on that scale, which means the big frog fits really well in contrast, as he is big and not airy. He's going to be big and heavy and rooted. You know, the boss is teleporting around and floating. He's a big heavy guy sitting on the ground. So that's the basic idea that I came up with. We're going to have a big frog and he's going to be corrupted. While I was trying to come up with details for the boss that could represent his like corruption, I noted down maybe he could have like 2 tongues instead of like the 1 tongue that a frog usually has. Which, because if you didn't know, actually, informational moment on this educational YouTube channel, frog usually have 1 tongue. This is supposed to be like a future fantasy, almost like alien setting, so maybe it's just that frogs on this planet or whatever have 2 tongues. Whatever. That's also not that important of a detail to focus on. What is important to focus on is the gameplay pattern that this inspired in me, which is, what if this big frog is trying to attack with his 2 tongues and he creates patterns that the player has to dodge by jumping between the tongues. So either he can lick both tongues out directly and you jump over it, or he can lick both upwards and you have to like slide under it, or he can go like over his head, in which case you're safe in front of him, like that sort of idea. So that's the idea for this mini boss. The design inspiration is a large, corrupted frog, heavy and rooted, with 2 tongues that the player has to dodge between. Yeah, normally in my devlogs, this would be where I would cut, and then I would go do a bunch of work, and then I'd come back and fill you in on what happened. But actually, I filmed the intro and all the like working on stuff, all the footage for that, like a while back, and it is gone, it is lost, it is to the ether. So instead, I will just now walk you through the process of working on this boss and getting BOBO working rather than, you know, the check-ins as we go. Here's BOBO. Whoop. I think the spikes on his back make him feel almost like just a touch like dinosaur-y. I don't know. Inorganic. It feels like he has these spikes to protect himself or to hurt other people. It just gives the feeling that I want. I really like this basic idea for him. He looks like a big corrupted frog. You can also see he's got like 6 eyes instead of just 2, which I think is a great detail as well, because what is a corrupt mutation other than growing eyeballs, right? So we have BOBO, and we have this design for him that looks really cool. Now it's time to start working on the actual gameplay. And so I had the thought of he's going to use his tongues to attack you, and you have to dodge those patterns. But if he's just like glued down in one corner of the stage and never moving from there, that's not fun, that's not interesting. There are some Mega Man bosses that just stay in one corner and shoot a bunch of different projectiles, but I always found those a little bit dull, where it feels like the boss is like a part of the stage rather than their own like living creature. So I didn't really like that too much, especially because I realized what are frogs famous for? They're famous for big tongue go blah, but the other thing that they're famous for is hopping. So a frog that doesn't have some form of hopping attack is a disgrace to froghood. But the idea here is very simple, where he stays in one corner of the room or the other, and he attacks you with his tongues, and then he can hop across the stage to get to the other corner. So he's either tonguing from the corner or So he's either tonguing you from the corner, or he's hopping across the stage to get to the other corner. And I thought that this would work great, especially because when he's hopping across the stage, this gives the player an opportunity to have to like dodge him. You either you dash under him, or you wait for him to land and go over him, that sort of thing. And then once he's situated in one of the corners, that's when he starts using the tongues to, you know, really go at you. So I gave those 2 attacks to Fur to get some blockouts made so that we can test that gameplay. So here's the blockout for his tongue attacks, and here's the blockout for his hopping attack. And I love the blockout for his tongue attack because that frog be poggin'. So I got these animations pulled into the game to test what the gameplay feels like. And so here you can watch me trying to dodge the tongues, and you can see that he has 3 patterns. He can either go both up in the air, 1 up in the air, and 1 along the ground, or both along the ground. So when he's going both up in the air, you have to stay grounded to dodge. When they both go on the ground, you have to get into the air to dodge. And when there's the middle point, then you have to specifically run and like hide on the wall. Like you have to either jump and dash toward the wall or dash jump toward the wall so you can cling to it to be able to dodge that attack. And I found that gameplay pattern to be pretty fun. At first, it was completely undodgeable because the wind-up animation is the same for all of his tongues. So he winds up, shoots his tongues out, and until the tongues start to come out, you can't see what they're going to be, which makes it like impossible to react in time. But I figured that we could just have a slightly different wind-up for the different tongues. If he looks one way, or if he winds up a certain way, or if he like brings his mouth down, those different wind-ups would be able to tell the player, hey, this is the attack that's coming, you better get ready to dodge it. So I wanted to test if those sort of tells would work. And so I just put this little colored rectangle on the screen next to his head. And when he starts his windup, I show the little colored rectangle. And at first it was hard for me to remember which rectangle corresponded to which tongue attack, but it would also take the player a little while to realize which windup animation informed which tongue attack. So I think that that's a fair comparison. And once I had those little colored rectangles in, boy, that fight was very fun. And then the hopping across the stage, that just like works great. He hops, you go under him, it feels amazing. With those 2 attacks in, you can watch me fighting the boss here as he jumps across the stage and shoots his tongues at me. And obviously the boss is still in a completely like blocked out stage. He's not like the detailed animations aren't in yet, but he's still a lot of fun to like just fight. He's a lot of fun to just try to kill. However, there is a problem, and that is that it gets stale. He can only hop across the stage and try to hit you with his tongue so many times before it's like, yeah, I get it. And so the 2 solutions to this are either to give him another attack or 2, or to just give him like a lower HP pool so that you don't end up going through the same pattern for too long. And the lower HP pool, if the fight doesn't last that long, it doesn't feel nearly as impactful, and you don't have to actually like learn the tongues. You can kind of just brute force it. And I don't like that very much. I kind of want the core engagement on this boss to feel like, you know, hey, I actually learned how to dodge the tongues. Hey, you can't get me with no tongues. I'm fucking tongue-proof, dog. So being able to just brute force it with the lower HP pool didn't feel like a great solution to me. So I wanted 2 more attacks for him. This is actually 4. If you know how to count, this is actually 4, but I wanted 2. The theme of the level is like disgust. And what's grosser than spitting? I thought, okay, what if he like spits and it like shoots his frog spit? And while it's traveling through the air, obviously the spit will like damage you. But then once it lands, it can create like a little obstacle on the ground that the player will move slower through. So he can kind of use it for like environmental control, where he can stop the player from being able to do literally anything in the space they have available, because, you know, there's some spit on the ground. You don't step in that, otherwise you won't be fast enough to dodge the tongues, or you won't be quick enough to dodge the hops. And I think the hops is actually the more interesting one, because with the tongues, you kind of like get the pattern down pretty quick, but when he hops across the stage, you can kind of just like go underneath him. But if the spit makes you move slower and stops you from dashing, suddenly you have to change the way you avoid his hops, because there might be a thing right in the path that you want to dash through. And so I think that works really well. And it gives him a sort of ranged attack, where if you are kind of camping at one side and then like dash in, you can dodge his tongues by camping at one side and then dash in and hit him before the next tongue comes out. He can actually just try to shoot you with spit first and then send the tongue out, like with a shorter delay to it, so that he's not as predictable. You can't just like hide, run in, hit him, and run away. Because that's what I ended up doing a lot while I was playtesting him. And then for a second attack, the other thing I want to prevent is the player from just like camping in front of him and just like mashing until he like winds up, and then you just try to dodge at the last second, because I didn't want his tongues to just come out over and over and over and over really quickly. And so the way I can prevent this is by having something that he does a little bit faster, but in like close melee range. And he's a big boy, and I thought, dude, what's funnier than him just like leaning back and just trying to slam you with his big ass body? Then, in addition to that, when he slams with his body, he can like let out a shockwave along the ground, just to give something else for the player to dodge, and not to and also to make the attack feel a little bit less like limited. And there's any number of projectiles we can have that launch. He could hit the ground and like knock a boulder that goes spinning through the air, or knock several rocks up or whatever. So that slam, not only does it have the hitbox of his body, but also we can add whatever projectiles or whatever we need to make the fight more interesting. So those were the two attacks I came up with. Fur, again, made the blockouts for those animations, and you can see here is his spit animation, and here's his slam animation. And so I got these plugged in. I actually prototyped the spit attack using the same tongue windup before I even sent that to Fur for the blockout, because I wanted to make sure it made sense. And I think that works pretty cleanly. Like here you can see he spits at me, I get stuck when I walk through it, and Isadora even has a really nice little like difficult walk animation where it looks like she's walking through a snowstorm, and I think that animation looks great when you're walking through the spit on the ground, because even though the spit doesn't have any of its effects or anything really tied to it yet, it like slows her effectively. Side note, I had to build a whole like status condition system under Isadora to be able to apply this like slowdown effect. And it's a little bit rough. Maybe I'll cover it in a later video. Maybe I won't. But just a side note, I built a whole status handler for the player just so Bobo's spit can slow him down. And then here is the slam attack, which is hilarious. I don't even know if it's that effective, but it just makes me laugh too much that it's got to be in there. I mean, look at it. He's trying so hard. Look at him. And so with the slam attack and the spit attack, as well as his tongues and his hopping across the stage, we now have what feels like a pretty like complete boss fight. From playtesting, it doesn't get dull by the time it's over, right? It feels like I'm constantly dealing with him, and it feels like he has a whole arsenal of things at his disposal. It's not just now you're dead. However, during playtesting these attacks, when I had them all together, again, two more problems to solve. The first problem to solve is that he feels very stupid. Bobo is not a smart frog. He kind of just does whatever. And that's because the way I had him decide which attack to use was that he randomly rolled like a 7-sided die, and then on a 1, he would do one tongue attack. On a 2, he did a different tongue pattern. On a 3, he did his other tongue pattern. On a 4, he jumped across the stage. On a 5, he spit. On a 6, he slam. I guess it was a 6-sided die. I don't know how to count. And this makes it feel very obvious that he's not like reacting to the player. He might as well have all 6 of those eyes closed. So he's not reacting to the player at all. He's just choosing his move and doing it. And this feels pretty obvious. In the playtesting against him, you can watch me fighting him here before with that like very simple AI. It doesn't feel like he's even trying to hit me. It just feels like he's doing whatever. The problem is that if he's just doing whatever and you're just like standing still and he just keeps missing you, it just feels really stupid. And so I needed to write some kind of update to his AI system to get him to behave a little more intelligently. The second problem is with the hop attack. It's just like incredibly easy to deal with that. It's like a non-factor, and it's obvious how to deal with it immediately. You don't have to think too hard about what do I do when he hops. He hops from his starting point a third of the way, then he hops 2/3 of the way, and then he hops to the other point. So he does 3 hops total. And the way to deal with it is when he starts the first hop, you dash underneath him, and then once he lands, you just start hitting him from the back. You start hitting him from the back. Anyway, once you dash underneath him and then you just start hitting him, the problem is he has like no way of dealing with it, and he has to keep hopping to get to the other side. His attacks don't work unless he's in the corner. He'll do his first hop, you dash underneath him, you start hitting him. His second hop, you just like walk to follow it, and then you hit him. And then he does his third hop, you walk to hit him, and then you continue fighting him. So I added like little shockwaves when he lands so that the player can't just like slowly walk up behind him and be totally fine while he's hopping. But even with the shockwaves when he lands, it's still trivial. You just hop over the shockwave and keep hitting him. And so I thought there are a couple ways I could solve this. He could like drop spikes when he lands, or he could do a different projectile when he lands. Instead of like a little shockwave along the ground, it could like kick something up. But I thought what would be funnier is if when you're chasing Bobo, if you stay too close behind him during his hop, he'll try to kick you. The idea is that he won't always kick if you're behind him, but if you're doing this chase pattern where you get behind him and you're just like hitting him while he continues to hop across, you have to be ready to dodge the kick. You can either say like, you know what, while he's hopping across, that's his business. You know what, you hop across, I'm gonna be over here doing my thing. I'm gonna be doing my own thing over here. You know, we're separate. I was gonna say we're separate but equal. Oops, that's that's not a good way to phrase it. It's like, yeah, you do your thing over there, buddy. You do your thing over there, Bobo. I'm fine over here. We're all good. Or you can take the riskier strat of continuing trying to deal damage to him while he's hopping across, but you have to be ready to deal with his kick. And with that in mind, so I told Fur that we needed Bobo to have like a little kick animation that he does between his hops. While Fur worked on that animation, I got to work retraining his AI. I got to work polishing his AI system. And so I can show you the result of that here, where Bobo now watches the entire stage. You can see these like blue rectangles on the screen are what Bobo's looking at. And he keeps track of where the player's at, and each area, each blue rectangle that he's keeping track of has certain actions associated with it. So if you are up in the air when Bobo's deciding what to do, he will try to use one of his attacks that can hit you up in the air, either his upward tongue swipes or his spit. And if you're on the ground, he will either use his like downward tongue swipes or his shockwave. And each of his actions has like a certain probability weight associated with it, which decreases the more he does it. So if you are just like running back and forth along the ground and you keep jumping over stuff, but you keep triggering that same thing, eventually he'll get sick of the fact that you keep doing that same thing and hop across to the other stage to just try to like up the action a little bit. So now he keeps track of where you are. He tries to use an attack appropriate to what the player is doing so that he keeps the player on their toes, right? And it feels like he's actually reacting to the player instead of just like doing random attacks. And he won't get repetitive or have long strings of doing the exact same thing because of the way the probability decreases as he takes an action. Now, it is still possible for him to just like do the same tongue swipe like 3 times in a row, but the odds of it are really low, and he literally can't do it 4 times. Once he's done an action 3 times in a row, it is no longer a possibility for him to do that action. It gets removed from the list of actions he can take. So he has a more varied moveset, he won't repeat moves, and he'll do moves appropriate to whatever action the player is currently taking. And to show you that, the footage you're seeing is me fighting him with the new AI. You can see how it feels like he's trying to hit the player. His attacks like don't just miss on their own. They only miss if I dodge them, compared to before where he was missing me when I was standing completely still. And you can kind of see the improvement to the AI there. Now that we have him smarter, we also can teach him how to do his potato kick. And this attack is hilarious. It is so funny because he just like winds up and hits you with those big honking legs. And so getting it in first, it like worked how I wanted it. So Fur made this hilarious animation that we have been calling his potato kick because he looked like a big potato kicking the player, right? The very first thing I did was plug it in, and it works great. If the player is behind Bobo in like a little box that he's watching, he will flip a coin basically and decide whether or not he wants to try to kick the player. Essentially, you can make Bobo angry by standing behind him. And with just the basic of he does the kick and it hits the player if they're standing there, it works. But Bobo really puts a lot of force into that kick. Like, I mean, look at that. When the player gets hit with those big honking potato legs, you'd expect Isadora to get a little bit more impacted rather than just the slight knockback that she has. So I added another type of like damage. What's the word? I don't know what to call it. Where you can either just hit them or you can fling them. And flinging the player is like a much stronger knockback. And when you fling the player, you can specify the knockback force that they're hit with and the knockback vector. So you can fling the player whatever direction you want with whatever force you want. And obviously Bobo's lines up with his kick for a really high force number. So now Bobo can kick the player with the force appropriate to the kick. And here you can see that happening here. It's very funny. When you actually get hit with the Bobo potato kick and you go flying, it is very good. I'm just reusing some of Isadora's animation frames for what she looks like when she's getting flung, but we will likely add a special animation for her where she's like, you know, twirling as appropriate. And if you get flung into the wall, maybe there'll be a little like bounce, like a little knockback off of it type deal, like that sort of thing. But now that that's in, BOBO is like pretty much good to go from the fighting perspective. And all that's left is getting the art working. For the most part, getting the art working is like no big deal. Fur just puts the details over top of the blockout we have, and then we have the attack. Here's the hopping animation, like actually in the fight, you can see, boom, detail, looking great. You got the spit animation looking great. You have the slam animation looking hilarious. And then you have the potato kick with its details, and all of that looked great. The one issue we ran into was the tongues. Those are a lot more complicated from like the art side. The way we had been planning on doing it was having like a 9-slice sprite, which is essentially you have like the sprite, you cut it into 9 sections like a tic-tac-toe board, and then the middle piece is stretchable and then the outer pieces stay the same. That way we can have the end of the tongue look like the end of the tongue and the base of the tongue look like the base of the tongue and the edges of it look totally fine, and it's just like the centerpiece that gets stretched out. That was the plan the whole time for the tongue, but we put in the official tongue art into this 9-slicing system, and you can see what that looks like in this example, and it looks kind of fucking bad. It doesn't really look very good. And so I was thinking about what's going to be the best way to like handle it, since that doesn't look that good, and we just decided to do hand-drawn tongues. Hand-drawn tongues is a very funny series of words. With the 3 different tongue swipes, each tongue has 2 possible positions, like the up diagonal one or the downward straight one. And then the 3 attacks are made of the 3 combinations of that, either both straight, one up, one down, or both up. And so if each tongue gets hand animated for 1 upward swipe and 1 forward swipe, then that's all we have to do. So that's 4 hand-drawn tongue animations that make up the 3 tongue swipes. And even though obviously doing those hand-drawn animations is a little more expensive in terms of how much time we have to put into it, to me, it felt worth it. And Fur did a fantastic job with the animation work on these hand-drawn tongue swipes. And so here you can see them working in game. Honestly, I think they look incredible. There's some very special attention paid to making sure the sprite stays lined up in the proper spot on BOBO's big empty mouth to make sure that the tongue feels properly rooted from the mouth. But these animations for the tongue compared to the animations for the 9-slice version, I mean, it's night and day. Let's do a little before, you've already seen them both, but here's the before like directly, and then here's the after directly, like before, after. Honestly, I think it looks way better. I think it looks really, really good. I mean, the animation is clean on those tongues. And with that, we basically have everything that we need for the boss fight, except for there was one idea I had while I was playtesting. I think I might have mentioned it before, I might not have, but there's one boss mechanic that I really like where you fight these big monsters and they have like a tell. They have like a specific frame of their attacks where if you hit the monster during that frame, you like counter them and they get stunned for a second, you get to deal some damage. And I thought that mechanic would actually work really, really well for this boss fight, where you can counter BOBO's slam to get some extra damage in. Sort of just like a nod for like people who are really, really experienced, or if you're trying to speed run, or if you're just trying to like show off, you're trying to get like a really good fight or like a no-hit BOBO or something. Oh, by the way, I don't think I ever mentioned that we decided to name this boss BOBO. Yeah, this boss named BOBO. So I decided to add like a counter mechanic to him, just to see how that felt, where he flashes a golden color during one frame of his slam animation, and if you damage him during that frame, he gets countered. And playing with that, it felt really good. It creates a really nice player moment of deciding whether or not to go for the counter or to not go for the counter, right? I can either play risky, go for the counter, and if I fail the counter, I get slammed, right? Because it's during a frame of the slam animation, I have to hit him with my sword, so there is no wiggle room. Either you hit it or you take the damage. If I have plenty of health and the fight's going great and I'm just trying to own this dude, then boom, I go for the counter, I get the extra damage and it feels great. But if I'm low on health, I'm playing a little bit more conservatively, I'm trying to just stay alive and finish the fight, then you know what, don't go for it. Then just let it be. Don't try to counter it. Don't try to get fancy. Just stay alive. I really like that interaction. And then I told Fur, like, hey, can you show me what you would do for like a counter out of this frame of the slam animation? And I specifically put it here. We can kind of zoom in on BOBO and you can see this is the frame where he flashes golden for a second. That's where you need to hit him for the counter. Fur made this animation of him getting countered and it is hilarious. It's so good. And it feels really good too. When you hit it and he like falls back and then you just get to wail on him and get some damage in, it feels really good. I tested it in the block out here so you can watch it. And honestly, it's all come together really, really well. I think BOBO is awesome. I think that this boss feels really, really good. I'm actually like shockingly pleased with how well this boss came out. I think he's super fun. I think he's going to make for a great mini boss in the forest. And it makes me excited to get to the Plague Doctor and see what I can whip up for her because this went just like so much better than I could have expected. I think we're going to wind out this video with just some straight up footage of the completed boss fight. Obviously, he doesn't have his like boss fight arena like environment art yet. And I still need to clean up some of the particle effects, you know, get special like particles done, maybe add some dust, all those little details. But that's stuff that is like a polish step, especially because I downloaded a bunch of like asset packs full of particle effects and other stuff that I can use to polish. And, you know, maybe it's not a good idea to procrastinate on that, but I don't want to do it right now. So I'm not gonna. Other than those polished details and the environment art, we have like a completed gameplay and sprite art for BOBO. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it. Hope you liked it. Subscribe, hit the like button, leave a comment, do all that good stuff. You know I love you. You're my little gamer babies. And you watch the video and you look at the big frog and you say, oh, that's a cool frog. I can't wait to kill him with my sword. And I say, yes, good job. All right, I'll see you later. Peace out, dorks. See ya.